Welcome to the Real Freedom Podcast, where we inspire you to pursue your passion to gain time and financial freedom through opportunities in real estate. I'm your host, Mike Swenson. Let's get some real freedom together. All right, welcome everybody to another episode of the Real Freedom Show, where we talk about different ways to build time and financial freedom through opportunities in real estate. What I really love doing is telling different stories, sharing unique perspectives, unique ideas of maybe things that you've never thought about. And when I found out about Josh, who's going to be our guest today, I was super curious. And so I think it's a concept that people certainly don't know about. But if you're out there listening, it might be something for you to think about, especially ways for people to kind of get started. I know for a lot of people, when they want to invest in real estate, it's like, well, I don't have, $50,000, $100,000 to pour into a property. I want to find a way to bring some income coming in. And Josh absolutely would be a good fit to do this. So today's guest, Josh Lawlor, talks about renting your home for film shoots as a strategy here for building income in real estate. And so there's so many ideas, probably beliefs that you have out there about what you could or couldn't do. And probably 99% of the people think, well, it's not for me. And Josh is really here to debunk that myth. So Josh teaches a course, which is now live, about how to do this. And it's going to be a lot of what we talk about. So welcome to the show, Josh Lawlor. We're so excited to have you.
Great. Excited to be here. Thanks again for having me.
So Josh, why don't you just talk a little bit about your background, what you've been doing prior to getting into this, kind of how you stumbled into doing rentals for film shoots for your properties, and we'll just go from there.
Sure. Sounds good. So I'm gonna step back a little bit first because, I think probably like most of your listeners, I had never heard of renting your home for film shoots and dabbled in other areas of real estate. So, if I just if we go back a bit, I worked a corporate job and, like many people, I was looking for how do I create passive income? Obviously stumbled into real estate, read the classic Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And my real estate journey really starts with what I'll call a long-term live-in flip. So taking it way back to about 2009, my wife and I bought a house. It was one of the classic, ugliest house on the block. Kitchen was a time capsule to about 1984. And we had a plan we knew we couldn't do the work right away, but we wanted to renovate, remodel, fix it up, and then ultimately sell. So we did that over a few years, and that enabled us. We created some equity with that work, and that enabled us to sort of dip our toes into what I'll call traditional single family home real estate investing. So I'm based in the Northeast, but I doing research at the time, several years back, didn't seem like the best market. I thought there were better markets out there to invest in, and I think like a lot of first-time real estate investors, I was a bit nervous about making a mistake, so I went the turnkey route. So I found a turnkey operator. And I invested in a handful of lower cost single family properties in the Atlanta region and the Jacksonville and one in Jacksonville, Florida. And so, had a property manager in place. So I was able to kind of manage the property manager remotely. And that's how we got our start. And, of course, 2 months after we purchased, get a call from the property manager. Hey, tenant didn't pay the rent, and of course I initially kind of freaked out and said, oh, I made a mistake. But fast forward and, the appreciation in those markets has just been, you could say we kind of got lucky, right place, right time. And again, we've taken advantage of cash out refis a couple times over the years, still hang on to four single family homes down there. But, the cash flow was never, you quickly realize with single family homes, you're cash flowing a couple $100 a month, few $100s a month after your mortgage, after your repairs. That's great. And then, there's a big repair at the end of the year and it kind of wipes out all of your gains. So, it was interesting. I got into it focusing on cash flow, but it's really been the appreciation that's yielded the greatest kind of in terms of, wealth creation for us. I've also So in addition to those single family homes, we've also invested in some small multifamily. So I'll say 2 to 4 unit apartment buildings. I would call these squarely in the C class. Again, kind of a real estate experiment. Probably wouldn't do it again. But again, I think it's important to you gotta take action. You gotta try things. So despite problems that we've had, again, these are in New York State, so a different region of the country. We do have again property managers in place, and we're making cash flow, but again, not really the kind of like, hey, I'm going to quit my job kind of cash flow. So anyway, so we've got a number of units, right, between single family homes and small multifamily apartments, and and we've got property managers in place. It's making income, but it's not necessarily moving the needle tremendously. And so I think I remember I told you we did sort of that long term. We started with this long term live and flip. So this is back in 2018. We ended up selling the renovated and added primary residence. Did all right on that, and we figured, what, we had a relatively smooth experience. Let's do it again. And so we found a place in our neighborhood, so only just a few blocks away. And it was a older home, needed a lot of work, but the lot size was larger than kind of the average size, and we knew we could go bigger. And so we embarked on a new project, and we took our plans to the town. And well, let me back up a little bit. So this structure that we bought, it was a little bit closer to the street than kind of newer houses, right? So we talked to several architects, and we talked specifically about the setbacks, right? And every local architect that we talked to said, yeah, the setbacks exceed the current zoning, but as long as you don't make it worse, you'll be fine, right? Mm-hmm. And of course, we take our plans to the town. Town says, nope, can't do this. The setbacks are not in line with current zoning. And so we had a decision to make. Do we, what do we want to do here? Do we want to just renovate without creating the addition? That's not really going to work for our kind of the business model. Mm-hmm. Or we do a tear down rebuild. And so we ultimately decided to do a tear down rebuild. So of course we had to find other kind of live somewhere, rent temporarily during the rebuild. And there's a reason why I'm bringing in this detail to this story. So we find a rental. It happens to be just outside of the school district lines where my children go to school, public school. And so we're renting temporarily. And then we get a letter a couple of weeks before Thanksgiving from our local school district saying, it's come to our attention that you are no longer residing in the mm-hmm. district. Please schedule a meeting immediately. Very, very kind of threatening letter. And it turned out that, I thought, oh, this is just, we'll explain the situation. We're temporarily displaced because we had to do a tear down instead of a renovation. But they held firm, and basically, I view it as almost like a school shakedown, because they say, well, you've got two choices. You can either pay us quote unquote tuition, and your kids can stay in their school, or they'll have to, temporarily, they'll have to go, be pushed out of the school district, go to their local school for the next 6 months or however long it takes to finish your project, and then they can come back. And so pretty crazy. But my wife and I went back and forth, and we figured, kids, we don't want to pull them away from their friends. So we ended up, we said, we bit the bullet, and we said, fine, we'll pay this tuition. We love our kids. We're not gonna disrupt their lives too much. Yeah. And we did that. But then of course, towards the end of our project, COVID happens, and residential construction in my state just gets shut down. So the project drags on. In the end, we ended up having to pay tens of thousands of dollars to the public school for tuition before we moved back into the house. And I bring this up because we were motivated to figure out a way to say, okay, we've just tossed out tens of thousands of dollars. Let's figure out a way. How do we kind of get that back somehow? And this is where we started to embark on film shoot rentals. So we moved back into this new house we had just built, and someone actually mentioned it. I think because there wasn't a lot of, we were sort of still in the process of moving in, pretty open. And someone said, oh, it'd be good. Someone in the industry said, oh, this might be an interesting house for film shoots. And we said, oh, never really heard of it, but looked into it. And we said, you know what, why not? So that's kind of how, that's sort of the quick sort of backstory of my real estate journey and kind of how we first started to get into film shoots.
For a lot of people, your journey makes sense, because what I really want to encourage people that haven't started investing or are thinking about investing is, it's a little bit of this windy road. We see people that have this sophisticated plan and they've got everything figured out, or at least what seems like they got figured out. And what you don't realize is it takes these little turns, and it's because you dipped your toe in the water over here that it led to doing this thing over there. And then it led to this other thing where you may not have just woke up and said, film shoot rentals, let's do it, unless you've kind of played around with some of the other areas of real estate investing and some of the other concepts. And so I think for people, what I like to tell them is just get started with something so that path can get started. Because if you just stand in the starting blocks, you're not going to be able to get to the finish line. And it's not necessarily, I think some people, think it's 100-yard dash where I see the lane lines and I just run straight ahead. It's probably more like a cross-country trail where you're going up some hills, around some hills, and trail back, and you're going around, and that's how you get to that path. And so I think what's really cool is your path is, you've dipped your toe in a couple different areas to get to where you're at. And then you eventually narrow in, focus on, what am I excited about? What really moves the needle for me? And this may be your thing, your final end game, or maybe you stumble across something else, or this opens up a door to something else, but people are so afraid to get started that they just they analyze all the theory and then they don't get out of those starting blocks.
And that's actually a good segue. I'll just add a comment on the kind of getting started. I think real estate in general is it's very forgiving. So, I remember one of the single family homes that I bought, obviously, we didn't have a huge budget coming from the Northeast. The cost of living is a little bit higher. So we were able to arbitrage a little bit there, kind of investing in the Southeast, starting about, 7 or so years ago. But I remember my underwriter, my lender for one of the homes was kind of looking at the appraisal and looking at the pictures. And she said, Josh, are you sure you want to invest in this home? And I said, yeah, let's move forward. And of course, it's, since then more than doubled in value, right? From an appreciation standpoint. But yeah, to come back to film shoots. So, like I said, we had just kind of been I call it extorted by the school district, and we're looking for a way to kind of get some of that back. And, I think you mentioned early in the intro that we're going to debunk some of the myths. So I think, when I talk to people, there are a lot of misconceptions about renting your home for film shoots. So when we say film shoots, what probably comes to mind is kind of big feature films, movies, weeks long, productions. That's really not what we're talking about. That's not the approach that I teach. When I say film shoots, I'm really talking about typically one day, non-feature film, but might be video shoots for a, online company that's looking to refresh their web content, right? So we're talking, one day commercial shoots, photo shoots. It could be anything from a startup that's launching a new site to maybe a retail company that has a new product line that they want to refresh. We've had in our house, we've had a lot of brands that you probably recognize, right? Some bigger brands like, Amazon, Lululemon, Zillow, but also a bunch of, smaller places that you probably never heard of that are new, a startup that was making a new breakfast cereal, right? Did a commercial in our house. And so that's the first kind of clarification, I think, when we're talking about film shoots. I think another myth and misconception that people think about is people think, oh, well, I'm not anywhere near Hollywood, right? Like I have to be near LA in this industry. And that's kind of probably like the second most common misconception. Because if you think about it, there are small businesses everywhere across the country, and not even just even outside of the United States as well. So there's always companies that need to develop content. Everyone has a website. everyone's on social media. So, you have to constantly create content. And if you're a professional, you're going to get it professionally done. So I think there's just been an explosion of the need for content, and that content has to be filmed somewhere. People may be wondering, well, why isn't it just done in studios? And I've actually asked this question myself to different crews that come to our house. And many of the crews will say, you know what, there's something about an actual house that you can't fake in a studio. Just the angles, the windows, the light. And so there's a need for this everywhere across the country, and people will travel. The other thing to keep in mind is, people may be worried, oh, I don't live near a big city, or, I'm in a rural area. Well, a lot of it really comes down to where the client is based. So we've had shoots where crews were flown in across the country because the client lived like 45 minutes from us, and he didn't want to travel. So, the crews traveled. And we've seen vice versa. We've had instances where, we had one shoot where the ultimate client was based in the Pacific Northwest, and they flew into us because they were working with a crew that was based in Brooklyn, which is about an hour and a half from where we live. So, geography doesn't matter. And I would say that's the other big myth, if I think about it, is, people think, well, my home I have a normal house. I have a normal apartment. My home isn't, is not fancy enough for shoots. And I've got a couple stories that I think really illustrate why there is no right home for film shoots. So one early on in our film shoot rental journey, we fielded an inquiry from a company that provides a platform for parents to search for care for their children. So think, babysitters, nannies, et cetera. So kind of traditional. So they came for a scouting visit, right? That's where, a producer and maybe a couple members of the crew will come for like an hour, check out your place, look at the lighting, maybe do some planning of scenes. So they walked through and they said, okay, well, let us come back to you. We'll give you a call. A couple of days later, the producer called me and she said, Josh, loved your house. It was great. But we're really looking for something that's, a little more lived in, looks like a house that's got little kids in it. My kids are a little bit older. And so, essentially, because our house was new, it didn't fit the requirements for the shoot. So I think, an important point for people to understand is that every shoot has different requirements. So, are there shoots that want a huge mansion by the ocean somewhere? Sure. But more commonly, shoots that are creating content to sell something to normal people are looking for a normal house. Okay. So I think that's kind of a key point. Let's see. What else in terms of debunking myths? I think that, the other thing too to think about is people might think that, oh, I need to leave my house, like, if is similar to Airbnb. But, I actually, the approach that I teach and I recommend is that people actually stay in their house the entire time. So you don't need to leave your house. Look, you're already in your asset, right? So we talked about, kind of having to sort of save up, or, you're worried about, kind of putting a big down payment. This is, I think, we collectively, we underutilize our homes, right? So, I think just that's a big benefit that I think for other people, right? Like you can get started immediately. There's none of this like, oh, I'm going to, I remember when I was first starting out investing, the underwriting process for a loan on a single family house took like, 4 months, right? And then, but you have your house, you can get started, right away. There's no additional down payment that's required. So yeah, those are just, a few of the, I don't know. I think it's important to kind of clarify, some of the myths.
Well, yeah. And I think about, I'm doing podcast appearances and people are asking me about investing in real estate, and probably every single podcast I've been on, they say, Mike, what are some tips that you have for how people can get started? This is it. Like, that's what I tell people is, you may not have a pile of money to get started. I always kind of encourage people, partner with somebody, try to start small, but just get in the game. Right. But something like this is a great opportunity. And I think number one, what I would challenge people to do is don't dismiss the idea until you take time to check it out. Because like you said, a lot of people, those are naturally the things that come in as not the right location, not the right house. Why couldn't I do it? And maybe just flip it and start with, if I were to do it, how could I get started? And
Right.
the worst thing that happens is nothing comes of it. But wouldn't you like to try that? The best thing that happens is this becomes something substantial for you, and it unlocks some new opportunities that maybe you didn't know were possible. And I think, yeah, as people are struggling to try to figure out how to get into real estate investing or generating income through real estate, yeah, this is about as low cost as it gets. So
Yeah.
why not take some time and try it out and
Yeah.
test the waters versus just letting the myths and all these reasons in your head just automatically dismiss it.
And I think it's worth, people at this point are probably wondering, okay, how much can I make, right? It's a kind of a reasonable question. So, and I think you mentioned early on in the intro, you said, well, who knows if this will be, for me, if this is sort of where I land in terms of real estate. I view this as very complementary to any other number of real estate. This is a way that I view as accelerating my real estate investing because of the additional income. I mean, we made about $50,000 in the first 6 months of doing this. And let me be clear, we're not renting our home every day. And it's probably worth stepping back. So, we rent the home that we live in. Okay. So, one of the advantages, and some of your listeners may be aware, may have heard of the Augusta Rule, right? This is the now I'm not a tax professional, but I will say that so the Augusta Rule basically says that the history was the Masters Golf Tournament in Augusta, Georgia, years ago. The locals sort of lobbied for a tax exemption so they could rent out their house for a couple weeks during the Masters and make money without paying taxes. So the rule stuck. It applies everywhere. So you can rent your home for up to 14 days tax-free. Now, obviously, you want to talk to your tax professional to kind of understand the nuances there. But I use that as a rule of thumb, and we price our home accordingly so that we don't exceed 14 days. I like the idea of renting my home for film shoots and not paying taxes. It's one of the reasons why many people get into real estate, I think. So let's talk about pricing. Obviously, different parts of the country are going to command different prices. But let me just give an example of kind of how film shoot rental pricing compares to other traditional real estate, because I've got experience in kind of a number of different real estate areas as well. So think about the traditional long-term rental, a house that might rent for $1,500 a month, right? Your typical, thinking like a typical 3-bedroom, 2-bath in a sort of mid-tier price part of the country, might rent for $1,500 a month. Fine. That same house on Airbnb, maybe it rents for $200 a night, right? So, with the right occupancy, maybe you're on Airbnb, you're going to get, a couple thousand a month on that, right? If over you're renting it for 10 nights a month, say. Film shoot rentals are interesting because you're renting by the hour on the platforms that I recommend. And so, in following that same example, a house that rents for about $1,500 a month on a long-term 12-month lease could probably rent for about $300 an hour. Now, I will say that so personally, we start at $600 an hour, but again, I'm in a high cost part of the country. So, but even with that example of a $300 an hour base rate, and the typical shoot day is probably about 10 to 12 hours. Okay. So, at a 10-hour day, $3,000, right? Before any add-on and cleaning fees and things like that I teach. So, and again, that's tax free if you kind of do it right and limit your shoot days to 14 days a year. Now, I will say that is what I'll call the base rate. So the approach that I teach in the course is to institute tiered pricing. So you can charge different rates depending on the size of the shoot. So when we talk about the size of the shoot, I'm primarily talking about the number of people. So a small shoot might be, no more than 10 people, right? That would be a base rate. And typically you're going to increase your base rate by about $100 with each new pricing tier. So that house example that we talked about that starts at 300 for, 1 to 10 people, I would recommend $400 an hour for up to 20 people and $500 an hour for up to 30 people. The most we made for a 1-day shoot, which I couldn't believe, was just over $11,000 for a 1-day shoot because it was a bit larger, right? So we had about 35 to 40 people. It was a full day, and they actually went overtime. So, and the way I teach you charge time and a half for overtime. So, if you think about that, so over $11,000, that's tax free. So that's like the equivalent of like 15,000 pre-tax. So you can kind of start to see, how this could work by not even, by doing, one shoot a month, right? Is kind of the cadence that we're doing. It works for our family. So yeah.
Just round clean numbers here.
Yep.
$300 an hour, 10 hours in a day, and that 14 days, like you talked about, that's $42,000 per year. That's going to be tough to cash flow 42,000 a year on a long
tax free. Yeah.
Right. And so, a long-term rental isn't going to give you $42,000 a year in cash flow.
And that's the kind of thing. And then you can obviously leverage that, right, to invest in additional real estate, build equity, et cetera. And even I think it's worth touching on. And again, this is something that I hadn't really considered until I was having a conversation with someone who does who's pretty into short-term rentals. So the interesting thing, and we talked about how I view film shoot rentals as a very complementary strategy to other real estate strategies. And so if you are a short-term rental investor, I know that other than maybe the luxury short-term rental market, it's been hit pretty hard, right? And regulations are changing constantly. But one of the nice things about film shoot rentals, if you're a short-term investor, is, think about your short-term bookings, right? It's mostly over the weekends, long weekends, 3-4 day weekends. Film shoot rentals take place during the week, right? So this is you can put your not only your primary home, but your short-term rental property up for film shoots as well. And it really is a complement in terms of, filling in some of the vacancies when you're not renting on a Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, right? So, another great opportunity there.
No, this is phenomenal. And like you said, I think complementary is a great word to use here, that you can find ways to maximize the value of your asset. Like you had mentioned earlier, real estate, in our own home, we don't always maximize that value. This is a way to squeeze a little bit more juice out of that orange. You can take the money that you earn from something like this that's tax-free, go plow it into something else. You could accelerate your mortgage payment with that money. You could save it up, go invest in a different type of property. You have your main property, you have a short-term rental, the short-term rental, now you start to do this a little bit. So I think complementary is a great word to use, where you can be creative here and start to figure out ways to build that snowball. I tell people, it's kind of like pushing a snowball down the hill. It's really hard to get it started, but once it starts to go, it's going to build momentum. And this might be a great entry point for somebody looking to kind of start that snowball.
Yeah. And we've had at this point, we've had repeat crews that have come back, more than once. They had a good experience. It works for them. I think it's also worth just touching though on, we've kind of touched on a lot of the benefits, and I'm obviously a big supporter. And I think this is great, for my family and for anyone really, but it's not like everything, right? You have to sort of be careful and do it right. There are pitfalls that you could encounter if you're not doing things right. I mean, I think some of the key things, you need to be able to screen potential guests appropriately, right? You want to get professional crews. So, we kind of I've learned a lot the hard way, right? And I've kind of put all these lessons into the course. And so just give an example. So when we first started out, first of all, we had no idea what to price our house at. So we priced it at like about half of what we're pricing it at now. Totally underpriced it. So of course, immediately, as soon as we put the listing up, started to get inquiries, started coming in. Hey, is it free? Free this date? And we were getting a lot of inquiries from people who only wanted the space for 1 or 2 hours, right? And so, some advice I'll give to the listeners: a shoot, it typically takes about an hour just to set up and about an hour just to load out and clean up. So, obviously everyone's situation is different, but if you're thinking about doing this, I would not recommend renting for 1 hour or 2 hours, especially if you're looking to optimize that Augusta Rule and the 14 days. You want to get full shoot days, and by doing that, you'll get more professional crews as well. So I learned early on, we did a music video, right? And these guys, I mean, I love music as much as anybody, but these guys showed up, 3 hours late. And then of course wanted to, kind of didn't want the clock to start, until they got there. So then ended up staying late. So I learned pretty quickly how to screen for professional crews. There are things that you can do. So what I do is we have, minimum number of hours, right? So that screens out a lot of people. You also, like I said, we've also raised our rates. We've kind of calibrated and found a rate that works for us in terms of getting us so that we have 1 or 2 shoots a month, so that we kind of can just stay right at that 14-day. We don't like to exceed that. So you need to know kind of which platforms to use. There are all kinds of platforms, search, and there are all kinds of platforms out there, but you want platforms that are going to attract the right guests, allow you the flexibility to have pricing transparency, right? So we've wasted a lot of time in the past dealing with location scouts. So when I first started, I thought, oh, I have to use the traditional location scout. But what I found in my experience is that location scouts really will sometimes, they just have to show a client a certain number of homes. And so they'll kind of use your home as like, oh, look, I found
Ticker,
5,
yep.
even though they know that they've got another one that they're using. And I've also run into cases where had, spent time on the phone talking about a potential shoot with a location scout, only to find out that the budget is, half of what we charge. Right. And so you want the right listing platform that enables pricing transparency. So you're not wasting your time. You can, define the shoots. I think this is another important point that we didn't talk about before. This idea of people may be worried. It's like, oh, I don't want 50 people in my house. Well, you can define exactly the size of the shoots that you feel comfortable with. You can define when you feel comfortable with your shoots. Do you want to only do it on weekdays or between certain hours? You can define all that. You have that flexibility. So, again, it's a great opportunity, but you want to make sure you do it right. You don't want to, your local town, there's local regulations that you need to be aware of, and you need to understand how to work with the town. You need to understand insurance considerations and legal contractual considerations. None of this is insurmountable, right? I mean, we've learned, and I'll give this little tip to the listeners in terms of agreements. So I always recommend going through a listing platform, because you'll have greater recourse. So early in our film shoot journey, we had a very small shoot. It was only like 6 or 7 people for like an organic pet food startup or something like this. And it should have been very, very smooth. But for whatever reason, and our town, our town requires film permits. Some towns do, some towns don't. But for whatever reason, our town rejected the permit for these guys. It was the only time that's ever happened, because towns usually, like to do this. It makes money from permit fees, et cetera. So my theory is that these guys were just kind of jerks, how difficult to work with. And the town administrator just said, you know what, I don't have to approve this. So they rejected it. And because we hadn't gone through a platform, they came after it. They sent this marketing agency sent their legal team after us and said, well, we've lost money because we couldn't do the shoot. In the end, luckily, we kind of talked them down. It was only between like $500 and $1,000 that we had to pay them. But I bring this up not to scare people, but just to say that you can't just jump in. You should kind of do it right, and kind of know there are considerations and things that you should know. And again, I've learned all these lessons the hard way, and that's why I've kind of packaged it all up into a course to get people started on the right path and kind of do it the right way from the start. So
yeah. Well, and I think it balances, it's balancing risk reward. I was on on a podcast today, and they're asking, well, what's the risks of investing in real estate? Yeah, there's risks out there, but there's also reward. I mean, do you want to make $11,000 in a day? Yeah. Do you have to go through a couple of lumps and bumps of, paying out that to be able to get to the spot where you make 11,000 in a day? Would you still be okay with that? Yeah. And so I'm a huge fan of, I talk about investing in yourself and investing in your education. This is a great opportunity to invest in that opportunity to create a stream of wealth. One other question I just was curious on, how much lead time is it on these bookings from when you get it booked to when they actually show up?
Yeah, that's a good question. What I found in this industry is that not a ton of lead time. So these are, I would say, anywhere from, the norm might be like 3 weeks, 4 weeks out, to sometimes we'll get a shoot and someone will look for, hey, they're looking for a location for the next week, 1 week out, typically because maybe their location fell through at the last minute and they're looking for, so that's typically, so anywhere from 1 week for the, when they're kind of in like need to find a place, to the more typical 3 to 4 weeks out seems to be the standard lead time.
And I know there's so much more information that we can cover that you obviously have in your course. So how can folks learn more about this? And then how can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so I can just be reached at josh@filmshootrentals.com. And I think, we talked about maybe we kind of get a link on your site and put it in the show notes so people can find the course and, learn a little bit more about this.
Awesome. Well, thanks,
Yeah.
Josh. I mean, I wish we probably could do another episode just going deeper on all this stuff.
Yeah.
But therein also is the value of your course and the knowledge that you've gained. But for people out there, like this is a great opportunity to start, and don't discount where you're at. Don't put those own limiting beliefs in your head. I think there's some good opportunity here, and learn what Josh has learned and provide a complementary tool in your arsenal to be able to build wealth, bring in some additional income. So definitely check out Josh and learn more about the course. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Really appreciated the chat. Have you ever heard the phrase, you're the average of the top 5 people that you hang around? Well, real estate agents, I'm excited to increase your 5 with you. We're launching the Real Freedom Investor Agent Tribe to help you get educated and connect with others to build your real estate investing journey, and also to help you along the way as you're working with real estate investors. So come check it out on our website, realfreedom.com. Go to the store. We have a membership, we have a mastermind group, and private coaching to help you stay accountable to your real estate investing goals and to make sure that you connect with like-minded people to accelerate your progress and to cheer you on along the way. Check it out, realfreedom.com. Click on the store.